Hey, welcome to another show. The Carolyn Glick Show today is with my friend and colleague and past guest on this show, Professor Avi Bell from Bar-Ilan University Law School and University of San Diego School of Law. And we're going to talk about two things. One is just briefly, because I don't think that the guidelines have even been published yet, but we're going to talk about the notice that the State Department gave to Congress late Friday afternoon last week, announcing that they were going to reinstate geographical limitations on U.S.-Israeli scientific cooperation. And those geographical limitations were going to apparently ban Israeli institutions beyond the 1949 armistice lines in Judea and Samaria from participating in these programs. I haven't seen the guidance published, but I'm not going to let, I want to start my conversation with Professor Bell about the implications of this, and then we're going to move on to the developments in Netanyahu's trial last week on June 20th. The three-judge panel presiding over Netanyahu's criminal trial brought the prosecutors and the defense attorneys into their chambers and told the prosecutors that they had not proved their case of bribery against the prime minister and that they would be hard-pressed to do so since all of the major prosecution witnesses on the charge have already testified. So we're going to talk about that and the implications and how the prosecution and their partners on the left have been responding to this with Avi Bell as well. So without further ado, first of all, welcome to the Carolyn Glick Show. Welcome back to the Carolyn Glick Show, Avi. Thanks for joining me this evening.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, okay. I know that you don't want to talk too deeply. We talked about this in our pre-taping discussion about the State Department's latest move in regard to Israeli scientific institutions in Judea and Samaria. But from what's been published and from statements that Senator Ted Cruz, for instance, has already made condemning the move, can you give me just sort of a general sense of what this involves to the best of what you can make of it?
It's as far as I can see, there's a fairly aggressive move along the lines that the European Union made several years ago. At the time when the European Union did it, it was relying upon what it claimed was a correct interpretation of an international law. And according to them, international law forbids Jews to live in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights. And because it forbids Jews to live in those places, it forbids the European Union to engage in various kinds of scientific and commercial activities with any Jews who live there. Now, it's a preposterous theory. The way the Europeans ended up enforcing it was shoving it into a treaty over Israeli participation in scientific programs in Europe. That is, they basically coerced Israel into agreeing to this bizarre theory. It's unclear to me how the United States has gotten Israel to agree to this. That is, I don't think that unilateral guidelines can subject Israel to a discriminatory standard or an illegal standard. And I'm not sure what the legal authority for this is, but I'll have to wait to see the guidelines to see how it is that they've justified this step.
Well, when the former ambassador David Friedman signed a deal or abandoned the previous guidelines that barred the United States from activities with Jews in Judea and Samaria, what was it that he did exactly?
I'm not familiar with the details of Ambassador Friedman's step. I can't help you there.
Okay, well, I think that the main thing then here, what we're looking at isn't so much legal as it is a policy message. And the policy message, Ariel University won 3 contracts after Friedman canceled geographical limitations on U.S.-Israeli scientific cooperation and allowed Ariel University to participate in them. And Ariel University is up in arms reasonably about this. They applied for a grant through USAID to do joint medical undertakings with the Palestinian Authority. So that's going to be off, apparently. But, the U.S. State Department doesn't seem to have any problem doing scientific cooperation with Palestinian universities that openly support terrorism, like Najaf University, Birzeit University, where Hamas wins the student council elections almost as a matter of course. So, this is, I think, very much a statement of hostility towards Jews
Right.
in Israel.
There's no way of describing these as geographic limitations alone, because the United States is engaging in scientific cooperation in those areas. It's just not engaging in cooperation with Israeli Jews. Now, whether there's a plausible justification in U.S. law, I have to see the guidelines.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we move on to something that you're a little bit more familiar with, which are the which is a criminal case that's been going on now for 22.5 years. I mean, against Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's charged with 1 count of bribery and I think 3 charges of breach of trust. I opened our discussion by noting to the audience that the court made a stunning move, which was more stunningly even reported by Channel 13, which has been one of the main sort of campaigners for criminalizing, incriminating, and demonizing Prime Minister Netanyahu and his supporters for the past 7 years. And so with sort of ashen faces, Baruch Krai and Aviad Glickman, 2 of the chief purveyors of the tale of Netanyahu's malicious criminality, were forced to report to the Israeli public that the court has just told prosecutors and defense attorneys that the bribery case has evaporated. What are the implications of that?
Well, it's hard to tell because this is a really odd move by the judges. I mean, let's understand the background here. The background is that the criminal charges themselves are garbage. That is, they should never have been brought. Now, you can really group them into 2. There are 4 distinct charges, but they're basically only 2 groups of accusations. So one of the accusations is that Netanyahu allegedly received or entertained offers to receive the, quote, bribe of positive media coverage. This is something that's preposterous, unknown anywhere in the democratic world. There's nowhere anywhere in the democratic world in any recorded case where somebody has been convicted of the so-called bribe of receiving or offering positive media coverage. There's a good reason why it's not criminal anywhere. That's because it would violate the freedom of speech and any reasonable conception of it. And it's also, since everybody in the media and politics are constantly in this game where public officials are looking for better coverage, and the media is offering them better coverage or worse coverage, depending on what they want, it's impossible to have such a criminal charge without it simply turning into a politician witch hunt. So that's group 1 of the charges. The other charges have to do with...
It's not only that it turns in, but I think it's important to hone in on this because it's not just that it's a political witch hunt of politicians or of reporters, editors, media owners. It's also that it gives the power to prosecutors to use this rule arbitrarily so that they get... So
Absolutely.
Any conversation between a journalist and a politician is a potential crime scene. I mean, this was the argument that you and Professor Alan Dershowitz and Nat Lewin made when you were making an argument before then he's still Avichai Mandelblit, but at that time he was the Attorney General in this sort of pre-indictment hearing that they had for Netanyahu in September of 2020 before the 3rd round of elections. And you guys made this very argument and the idea that the Attorney General and state prosecution has absolute power over politicians and over the media by saying essentially we get to decide
Everybody's a criminal.
you commit who is a criminal, and we have absolute power to do that because we've just invented a statute or a definition of bribery that's completely that gives us complete power over all politicians and all media organizations.
Right. So that's the main group of charges. There are three charges that have to do with this theory of bribery. It's the bribery charge in what's called Case 4000, where Netanyahu is alleged to have received positive or better coverage from the Walla news portal. And it's also the breach of trust charge in Case 4000, where Netanyahu is alleged to have made regulatory decisions while under the influence of this supposed positive coverage. And in Case 2000, where Netanyahu, having received an offer allegedly of better coverage from the Yediot news group, was considering whether to help the Yediot news group get legislation passed that would give it a competitive advantage. So all those cases, right, the breach of trust in 2000, the breach of trust in 4000, the bribery in 4000, they're all about the same thing. They're all about whether positive coverage is bribery. Now, there's another set of charges. That's the breach of trust in 1000, where Netanyahu is alleged to have received some gifts from a friend, Anon Milchin, who's an American-Israeli. He's currently in the UK. He just gave his testimony about it. One of the claims of the prosecution was that these were not gifts of a friend. They were quasi-bribes that were intended to get Netanyahu to do trivial acts like calling up the U.S. to get Milchin's visa extended. Now that this testimony is not going so well for the prosecution, so the first thing they asked Milchin was, does he see Netanyahu as a friend? And he said, more than a friend, a brother, right? Which it doesn't quite fit the prosecution's theory of untoward gift. I'll just say that there, we'll have to.
Let me just add, Milchin also said that he has absolutely no idea the quantities that he gave Netanyahu because he wasn't involved with dispersing them. He just sort of he said he had a steady supply in his house and they would give it to friends. By the way, he also gave them to Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, and then finance minister. He also gave them to then President Shimon Peres and then Labor Party leader, current President Yitzhak Herzog. So, I mean, he gave these gifts to lots of people. And then they asked him today in the questioning, and we're taping this on Monday, well, the judges said, well, what? First, the prosecutor, Liat Ben-Ari, said, did you ever object to to requests for champagne or cigars? And he said, no. And then and he said, no, I didn't, for the same reason that I wanted to give them. And then the judges said, well, why did you want to give them? And he said, because I was trying to figure out a way to help people who I think are doing important things for Israel. And then they said, well, did you ever work with Netanyahu, or did you ever try to get anything from Netanyahu? And he said, yeah, well, I was working with him because he's prime minister. I was trying to see whether we could work together to get the Jordanians to be involved with peace negotiations with the Palestinians, because I happen to have good contacts with the Jordanians. And so it was like he was trying to help on a national issue to the extent that his brother friend, the prime minister, would be interested in his assistance. But I mean, none of this stuff was personal gifts. So I mean, it was his entire testimony said, on the one hand, I don't know what I gave him. On the other hand, I wanted to give him everything. And then he also said, Netanyahu, I asked everybody, he's not an American citizen, he's a British citizen, and he had a 10-year visa, and the Americans only extended for a year. because there had been these press reports in Israel that he worked for the Mossad and he had helped the Mossad a few times, like 35 years earlier. And so they had only extended his visa in the United States, where he's a resident, for a year. And so he said, I called everyone and his brother to ask for help, including Netanyahu. What help did Netanyahu give you? He told me that I should talk to the ambassador. In other words, Netanyahu didn't give him any help. So he completely quashed the prosecution's case. And, we haven't even gotten to the cross-examination mentioned by the defense attorneys yet, so this is going to be fun.
So, so this gets us to the next important part of this. So the prosecution in laying out all these cases, it had some fairly weak contentions. It had a whole set of narratives that went around every one of these cases, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, none of which has been borne out by the evidence they brought. They gave a list of hundreds of witnesses that they wanted to bring into the court, and they've gone through all of their witnesses in case 4,000. We still got more witnesses to hear in the other cases, but it turns out that the narratives that they were selling were not borne out by the evidence, and so much as they have is, in many important respects, the result of apparently unlawful coercive behavior by the police and investigators. And so there's a heavy dose of official misconduct on the prosecution side that's come out, more, I think, than their narrative has been borne out. But this gets us to the really important thing here, which is the bribery charges, not just the main one in 4,000, but the breach of trust and in 2,000 and 4,000, they're essentially the same bribery charge. They don't require any factual proof, or at least none that's difficult. I mean, every single public official receives media coverage, and that media coverage is sometimes helpful and sometimes not. And Netanyahu was a public official during this time. He was prime minister. Obviously, he received media coverage, and it shouldn't be difficult to prove that he received media coverage and he wanted it to be better. Right? That's true of every public official everywhere in the world. And so the facts are not really at issue in 2,000 and 4,000. What's at issue is the law. The question is whether the judges are going to buy the theory that that's bribery. Now, if the court is not going to accept the theory that it's bribery, then 2,000 and 4,000, both breach of trust and bribery, are gone. There's no possible conviction. But this brings us to the last bit, which is the judges didn't say this in open court. They didn't dismiss the charges. They didn't. They haven't so far tipped their hand on the prosecutorial misconduct. They haven't said anything yet about the fact that apparently the investigation was opened illegally because the Attorney General had to give written authorization for an investigation before it began, and he did not. The court hasn't done anything about any of these things. All the motions so far have let the case continue going. And the bribery case is still there officially on the books. What the court was doing here was very transparently pressing the sides to try to negotiate a way out of this before the court has to rule. Right? It's not the court signaling that the case is dead because they're not killing the case. It's the court signaling it's really uncomfortable being asked to give a conviction on this kind of garbage case. Right? And so they're begging the prosecution, please take this out of our hands.
But this isn't the first time that they've done this. I mean, they've done this twice already. Most recently they said, go to first. I think the first request was to try to reach some sort of a plea deal, and that didn't work. And then they said, please go to, I think it's called criminal arbitration.
Mediation. It's called mediation.
And the Attorney General rejected the request. And then they said, you haven't proved the bribery. and that was last week. And the amazing response of the prosecution of Attorney General Gali Barav Miara that they relayed to all of the court reporters is that, no, but we expect that the defense is going to prove our case.
Right.
I mean, this is literally what they're saying. They're saying that, all on Saturday night, Donna Weiss, who is herself a lawyer, and she's a former legal commentator for Channel 12, and now she's an anchor there. And so she said with a straight face, she said, they expect for the defense to make their case. They're waiting for Netanyahu to come and incriminate himself on the witness stand when he's cross-examined, when he's brought as a witness for the defense. And this was just sort of an amazing statement, and this is a statement that all the reporters are saying. They said it on Army radio, they said it on Israel radio, they said it in the various newspapers, that this isn't a big deal. It's nothing. It's a small tap on the motor. It's no big deal. It's not even an accident, and we don't care because we know that the defense is going to make the prosecution's case. The defense is going to make the case that over the past 2.5 years, with over 40 witnesses that have come and gone and all been prosecution witnesses and all left the stand as defense witnesses, they all mean nothing, because the person who's really going to put Netanyahu in jail or get him convicted for bribery is Netanyahu himself. So, this is like, the screeching fingernails on the blackboard kind of thing that you hear, and you're just like, I can't believe that they're saying this. It's so stupid,
But this is not a serious legal prediction. It's not like they actually believe that there's going to be brand new evidence that's going to win a conviction. Because as I said, there's no difficulty with the facts in cases 2000 and 4000.
I actually know why you say that, because what they've shown are a couple of things. They've shown that Netanyahu did not provide regulatory advantage to Bezeq telecommunications firm. To the contrary, his policy caused them massive losses. They've shown,
and that's not
that
relevant to a bribery charge.
Wait, they also said that he did not receive that he received neither supportive coverage nor what they call undue consideration of requests from. He didn't even make any, and to the extent that they listened to any of his spokesman's requests, they were mainly press releases that everybody got. So that, the facts as they laid out, or the claims that they laid out in the indictment about what happened and what Netanyahu did, and that Netanyahu spoke with the Director General of the Communications Minister, Shlomo Filber, and he told him, look, you got to help Alovich. That not only did he not say that, but the meeting never actually even took place. That they claimed that a meeting on date X took place, and there was no meeting. So why do you say that the facts still bear out the...
All that is irrelevant. It's
and
true
how
that
is
the
that?
narrative that's true that the narrative that the prosecution presented is in tatters. But the narrative is irrelevant, because a bribery charge in Israel requires only one thing. It requires that someone gave a thing of value to a public official. When giving that thing of value, the giver must have expected to get a result. It doesn't have to be specific. It can be a result at some indefinite time in the future and vague, right? They call this theory in legal jargon in Israel, they call it casting your bread upon the waters. If I give a judge $1 million for nothing, I don't say I don't want anything. Just the idea is, now I've bought myself a judge. That's a bribe. It doesn't have to be for a particular case. So,
but again, Netanyahu didn't receive favorable coverage.
Everybody receives coverage that's a little better or a little worse, or it's slightly more helpful or slightly not less helpful. they described it in their narrative as if he got the greatest coverage in the world, as if he got PR services. Well, of course he didn't, but that's not relevant. If you accept the theory that helpful media coverage is a bribe, every single public official in every single place in the world, in a democratic place in the world, is guilty of this. It's not a criminal charge that's difficult to prove on the facts ever. It'll only be difficult to prove that it's actually a crime. If the judges accept that it's a crime, Netanyahu and everybody else is guilty. The judges are guilty. The prosecution is guilty. The attorney general is guilty. Everybody in the Knesset is guilty. We're all guilty. Everybody's guilty. If the judges accept that it's a crime. If they do not accept it's a crime, then everybody's innocent of it because there's no crime. Facts make no difference.
They already accepted it? Didn't they already accept it as a crime when they agreed to take this case?
No, well, that's the thing. They're not ruling on this until the end. They're taking all the police misconduct. They push that to the end. The failure to properly initiate the investigation, they push that to the end. And the question of how to evaluate the facts, they're pushing that to the end too. In saying to the prosecution, look, we don't think you can win on the case you presented on bribery in 4,000. That's not really telling us what their legal conclusion is, because if the case hasn't been proved for 4,000, then it hasn't been proved for 2,000 either, and it hasn't been proved for breach of trust, right? I mean, there's no way that Netanyahu can be guilty of breach of trust in 4,000, but innocent of the bribe. It's just not possible, right?
Okay, so let's move from there for a second, because I think that the general assumption, including of the prosecution, because they seem to be having a temper tantrum. I mean, they're also another talking point that they're putting out that everybody is parroting is that the judges are incompetent. Liad Ben-Ari, the chief prosecutor, she wrote a letter that I think it was Saturday night, and it was immediately sent to the media. I think that they were CC'd, not even blind copied. They just got a copy. Every reporter in the country was sympathetic to the prosecution, where they asked the judges in no uncertain terms to speed up the trial, have more hearings, work longer hours,
work during vacation,
and cancel vacation in July. That's another thing. And the other thing that she said was that we request that you no longer. First of all, it's clear that the side that leaked this, the judge's statement, was not the defense. It was the prosecution. They did it to shape the narrative that they wanted to shape. And so she says, the discussion in your chambers was leaked to the media and in a distorted way. And we request that you no longer have private meetings with the sides in your chambers, that all discussions take place in the courtroom with a stenographer so that there's a protocol, because otherwise they're going to be distorted. And now she's the one, apparently, who distorted them. I mean, we've seen a chain of unrelenting leaks from the prosecution and from police investigators to the media for the past 7 years to shape a narrative. So then she says this. So actually, wait, let me just finish. They're kind of threatening the judges because they're also laying the groundwork to say, we don't agree with your conclusion about the bribery. We think that you're incompetent. And by the way, we can appeal if you don't accept our case. And so they're planning on dragging this on, forever, is basically what they're saying.
Yeah, so let's understand that everybody can see this and see that the legal charges here are garbage. These are not charges that would be brought in a well-functioning legal system. And in a well-functioning legal system, no attorney general would ever approve this sort of stuff. Frankly, it's an embarrassment to the system. And the prosecutors and the judges in the Supreme Court, if they have to hear an appeal, all know this, right? And so the question is, what's going what's going to win this for the prosecution then? And I think that one of the things that they're relying on, and that's one of the things that you can see in her comments, is that the judges are not going to leave the prosecution out to hang like that, to get embarrassed by having the emperor's new clothes, the nakedness out there for everyone to see. And so they're calling what they think is the judge's bluff, right? They're pretty sure that the court, no matter what the merits, is going to convict Netanyahu of something. And they're going to do it because otherwise would be to expose the misbehavior and the corruption and the incompetence of the state prosecution. And they're betting that the judges won't want to do that. And she's throwing it back in their faces. Don't threaten to me that you're going to let him off. You wouldn't dare do that.
You know what's so interesting about that, right, is that these protests that we've been suffering for the past 5 months from the left, when you're saying that they're all for democracy, is that they claim that any reform of the judicial system at all is going to undermine the independence of judges. But here what we see with a pile-on against the judges for saying, look, guys, you didn't prove the bribery case for your information. So everybody's now attacking them. So they don't want judicial independence. They want judicial mobilization on behalf of the left. And so any judgment that doesn't serve the left's political power ambitions is by definition not democratic, not independent, not competent, not professional. It's politicized and corrupt. So that what we're seeing here in real time is the vapidity of their claim that what they seek is judicial independence. They want to domesticate any judge who thinks that otherwise, which is, it's pretty ironic, but I think it's also very telling.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is the overlap between the anti-reform movement and the anti-Netanyahu movement. Especially on these sorts of legal matters, and so there's an obvious overlap. Of if you look at the so-called protests, the street violence, the mob harassment, that's being organized by the same people. They just moved over, from demanding a show trial of the prime minister on non-crimes to now demanding that judicial aristocracy be empowered over parliamentary democracy, and that labeling everybody who doesn't agree with them an autocrat and a dictator and whatever else. It's the same people, but it's also the same rhetorical style. And the rhetorical style is very, very Orwellian. Everything is its opposite. If you hear them screaming that they want judicial independence, then what you should understand that you're hearing is a demand that judicial compliance with their demands, judicial pliability, that they be able to control what's going on. If they demand democracy, then you can understand they're intending to shut down democracy and institute a rule of their own little clique. And that's the real relationship. And one of the funniest things is that the anti-reformists claim that people like me, who have criticized judicial overreach for decades now in Israel, and have called for judicial reform all of this time, along with multiple allies, both on the left and right, until this became part of the anti-Netanyahu politics about 6 months ago. That all of a sudden we've been doing this for the last 30 years. We've been doing this because of Netanyahu's trial. That's the reason we're doing it, right? And it's a way of casting aspersions on everybody else's motivations. But I think that you are looking at the same sort of thing. It's mindless mantras that are Orwellian, that are exactly the opposite of what they say. What you're looking at in this trial is a walking, talking embarrassment. to Israel's legal system. These are not criminal charges that should be brought in a functioning democracy. They are not charges that should be brought in any liberal democracy, certainly. And if I don't want to criticize the judges, but I do think that the only sensible thing to have done was, when the charges were filed, to dismiss them on the spot.
You know what's weird, and that's really the worrisome thing here, is that if you're saying that you think, and I think you're right, that Liat Ben-Ari and Gali Barab Miara and their colleagues in the media are trying to intimidate the judges with what they're doing, that what we're really seeing is that they might succeed, because the judges have not wanted to go head to head with them. They've been, there were allegations against the presiding judge, what's her name, Rivka Friedman, that she's a hanging judge, that her son was a leftist political activist, and that people have heard her saying that, Netanyahu is her scalp or whatever, so that, there have been allegations made against her from the outset, before the trial even opened. And here she is saying this to them. So she's saying, save us from the humiliation of the judgment. And they're saying, nope, we're not going to. You have to convict. And if you don't, well, then, your life is going to be unbearable. And, that's the other aspect to that, is that, Liat Ben-Ari said, we want to hurry this up. And there are two ways to look at that. We want to hurry up till a conviction, or we want to hurry up till we appeal. And we're intending to appeal. We will not accept an exoneration. We will not accept an acquittal. And we're going to, and, they've already, and that's the other thing that, that's so notable, is that they've driven Israel into the ground over the past 7 years. They've torn apart Israeli society. They've caused domestic rancor, the likes of which we've never seen. And I mean, you have mutiny in the reserves. You have these leftists in the Air Force and in special ops and in cyber units saying that they're not going to serve under a dictatorship and taking active role in the protests. And you have all of these things that nobody ever saw before, and none of this would have happened if Mandelblit and then state prosecutor Shai Nitzan hadn't concocted this crazy theory as a means to use legal apparatuses of state prosecution to oust a popular and successful prime minister they hated from office.
Yeah, let me just, one thing I want to correct. I don't think it's true to say that the attorney general and the prosecution are threatening personal consequences for the judges, because I haven't seen any evidence of that. I think that the nature of the threat is, you have to convict, because otherwise the whole system is going to come down. You're going to make a joke out of us, right? And so therefore you must convict, or it'll be on your head.
I mean, Aaron Barak said the same thing, right? I mean, Aaron Barak, who's the head of this whole pyramid, wanted to reach a plea deal. And what they're saying is, this was, I think, the headline in Yediot Ahronot on Friday after the news came out Thursday night, was that Gali Barab has given her demands for a plea deal, and they include that Netanyahu be banned from public life, right? And so, again, this just goes back to the same thing. There is no legal case. It's a political witch hunt through legal means. It's an attempted coup. And they're not going to walk away from it until they've banned Netanyahu from office.
Right. The scalp is more important to them than preserving the legal system. Right. But that's an important message to the judges, right? That is, we have to have our scalp. There is nothing that's going to make us stop until we get our scalp. And so,
well, maybe it's a zero-sum game. They've set it up as a zero-sum game. Either they have Netanyahu's scalp, or the whole thing comes down. And what Aaron Barak and the judges are saying to them if you just cop a plea with him, if you just reach a deal with him, then we can preserve our privilege and power. We can get out of this, but we can't do it.
But Barack also wants the plea deal to include Netanyahu leaving public life, which is not going to happen. The idea is either we go through the trial to the end and we convict you, or you accept the conviction early and all of the relevant punishment that is being banned from politics, and we win anyway. Now, that's not really an offer. If you want to make really an offer, what you would really offer is something, let's slap you on the wrist, call it a day. But they're not going to agree to a plea bargain like that because, again, the prosecution, they value getting Netanyahu out of office more than they value the preservation of the system. And number two is they think because they have this, general understanding, because they're conveying this, we'll take down the system before we let him get away, that they're messaging to the judges, both in district court and the Supreme Court, don't you dare let him off, because if you let him off, we are going to bring the system down. That is going to bring the system down. So if you value the system, you value that you have to back us because we're not compromising.
There is no out then. I mean, we just have to see this whole thing through. And again, this will go to appeal. So this will be in what's the most interesting thing about it is that they initially were claiming, and I don't know, there was some controversy about whether the judges, when they told the prosecution that they hadn't proved their bribery case, had added that, that they were talking about the good of the state of Israel, that somehow or another the good of the country came into the discussion, and the judges were pleading that, telling the prosecution, look, you haven't made your case for bribery, and for the good of the country, we have to move on from here. And they were attacked for that mercilessly by the Ministry of Justice officials that were quoted anonymously by all of the regular partners and comrades in arms in the media, and they were and the way that they crucified them was by saying that it was absurd to think that not acquitting Netanyahu was going to be any way beneficial to the country, because of course the country's benefit can only be achieved or secured by convicting him, because he's obviously a criminal, because his first name is Benjamin and his last name is Netanyahu. So that just sort of goes without saying. And so anybody who calls for anything less than that can, by definition, not be caring about the good of the country. And so they were attacked because of the very notion.
Yes.
And the thing is that the country, they're driving the country into the ground with this, because they've just riven Israeli society so completely.
So look, ultimately this comes down to, it's going to take an enormous amount of integrity and courage to say the obvious. And the obvious is that not only is he innocent of the charges being brought against him, but the charges should never been brought, and there should be something done about the prosecutorial misconduct that was revealed in this case. Now that's what should happen, but in order for that to happen, we'll take people who will be able to stand up to the kinds of threats and insults and harassment that's going to follow for saying the truth. And I don't know if we have judges of that stature. I hope we do, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But when you look, we'll just sort of round out this discussion, I guess. When you look at what happened last week with the report on what the judges said and the actual statement that they made, apparently in their chambers, to the prosecution and the defense attorneys, nobody is denied. Everybody is acknowledged as true. Um, on did you when you received the news, what kind of impression did you get from it? Did you feel that the situation for Netanyahu from a legal perspective has gotten better as a result of this statement, or you don't think that it means anything because the real question has never been legal to begin with. It's always been whether the judges have integrity or not.
I think that the situation is better for Netanyahu in the following sense. I think that the public now has a clearer idea of the things that legal insiders have always known, which is the case is garbage, that everybody's circling the wagons in order to proclaim loudly that there are really strong charges because they don't want to admit the obvious truth. That this parade of hundreds of witnesses is political. It's not really legal, right? There's no set of facts that's particularly important or relevant to this. This is ultimately all just a political show trial, and the fact that this leaked made that clear, I think, to a much larger segment of the public. As far as what's going to happen, I think the dynamic is still there, right? Which is these are garbage cases, and either the judges have the courage and the integrity to throw them out or not. And this private conference in which they press the sides to get to a plea deal, in which they press the prosecution to tone down its expectations, I don't know if that makes me more confident in their courage and integrity or less. And that's, on the one hand, yes, it's true that they apparently see how meritless the charges are. But on the other hand, and they didn't dismiss the charges. They didn't even say this in open court, right? They said this in a private conference, only about one of the 4 meritless charges. They did so in order to push to a plea bargain rather than to get rid of this garbage. So it's not exactly profile of courage here.
Oh, well. So let's move on. Let's move on from this thing to just have a brief discussion about where the government's efforts to reform the legal system actually stand. I mean, we're just to bring our listeners and viewers up to speed. As you may recall, in January, Justice Minister Yariv Levin presented his package for legal reforms, which were supposed to change the way that judges are selected in Israel, supposed to end the judicial system's ability to cancel laws and government policies by saying that they were unreasonable, and limit the power of the Attorney General and the government legal advisors to dictate policies through legal opinions that they insist are binding, even though there's no basis in law for that. And the left said, and there was one other thing. What was the last one that they did? And one last one. And the left, as you know, has set the country on fire. Massive protests. The pilots said they wouldn't fly. And the cyber warriors said that they wouldn't go to their keyboards and all of the rest of it. And then some of the members of the Likud were saying they couldn't vote for it. They needed compromise. And there was a fear that the government didn't have 61 votes and that the army was going to go into open rebellion. So Netanyahu, who had been barred by the Attorney General from involving himself at all in the central agenda of his government, because he's on trial for these garbage charges, and then they had to pass a special law saying that he was allowed to handle them. So he was out of the discussion almost the entire time. And then when he finally got back in, he said, you know what, let's try to reach some sort of agreed package of reforms at the president's office. So he put it on the back burner. The protests have continued throughout. The riots have continued throughout. The harassment and assault and battery of government ministers and members of Knesset by these hordes has continued throughout. They just founded last Saturday night the Kaplan Brigades that are apparently going to enact a civil rebellion against the government. The Shin Bet just arrested somebody and brought him under administrative detention for doing something apparently terror-related following the announcement of the establishment of the Kaplan Brigades last Saturday night. So this has all been going on while the government was trying to do while the government had put the reform on the back burner, and then they were trying to reach an agreement with the president. The opposition agreed on a lot of things like the reasonableness clauses and changes in the judicial selection process. I think, or no, not that one. The powers of the attorney general, but they refused to sign any agreement. And then I think last week the government said, "Okay, never mind. You guys want to scuttle the whole reform thing. We're going to go back to legislating." As one does in a parliamentary democracy, and now they're putting forward the reasonableness clause again in a reduced version.
Well, here let's about the reform really is about two separate groups of things. Okay, they're linked because one of the groups is the big one. This is the legislation everybody knows, and then this is there are reforms of specific doctrines that were done over the years by the Aaron Barak court. Starting as far back as the 1980s, but primarily in the 1990s and 2000s, that turned the court into an institution that's all powerful in Israel, and the likes of which has never been seen in a democratic world. It turns us into some sort of lesser democracy, a tutelary democracy under the charge of a judicial aristocracy. Now, the main group of reforms has to do with changing specific doctrines: judicial reform, power of attorney general, administrative review, reasonableness, justiciability, etc. That's the bunch that everybody knows about. That's substantively really important. But the truth is that it's all meaningless unless the second group is implemented, which is changing the way judges are selected. And the reason is, if you have the current bunch of judges, right, the current selection process, and the current judges that we have, then every law will either be overturned or deliberately misinterpreted or crunched down so that the courts end up with all the same power that they have.
Oh, right. The last one was constraining their ability or their power to abrogate Knesset laws. I think that was
right.
the last.
Judicial review of legislation, right? So all those things, by the way, they're lawless. There's nothing in the current books, the law in the books, that gives them the power to overturn legislation this way. They've just created it for themselves. And so if you pass all of the reform except for judicial appointments, then within a very short period of time, we'll find ourselves as if there was no reform at all, right? Which makes the judicial appointments key here, right? There has to be a way of changing the balance on the bench so that it's not 99% hyperactivist judges who believe in judicial aristocracy, that there's some more balance between judicial restraint and judicial activism. Now, that's where the fight is right now. So we're in the middle of a fight about how the current Judicial Appointments Committee is going to be made up. And it's a less than important fight because the deck is already stacked, and no matter who the final persons are that are chosen for it by the Bar Association and by the Knesset, there's going to be a built-in majority for the judicial activists and a veto power over anyone else, which they will be able to use to kill anyone. So it's because of that, because of the fight over judicial appointments, that the opposition, for unfathomable reasons, decided it's boycotting all negotiations. Right? And because it's boycotting all negotiations, it's basically opened up room for the government, the coalition, to get back to governing, because there are no talks going on because they're boycotting the talks. Well, if there are no talks going on, then it's possible to start moving on the reform. And Netanyahu's planned approach, which is been stated quite widely, is some small things now with the attempt to try to continue negotiations. I think it's fairly clear that the opposition's approach is to make sure that any negotiations end up nowhere, because they're happy with a judicial aristocracy that leans left. And so at some point, and we're not there yet, but at some point in the not too distant future, we're going to have to get to the bulk of the reforms and the most important reform, which is getting the judiciary so it's no longer stacked in favor of aristocracy, getting a judiciary that's more balanced. And that's not yet on the horizon. What we're talking about now is a small, obvious, and common sense reform that says that judges can't strike down administrative and legislative action simply because they disagree with the policy by calling it unreasonable. But that said, if we have the current judges, then that law, even if it passes, will be disregarded or misinterpreted so that it doesn't achieve all that much. Now, that doesn't mean that yeah.
I mean, Aaron Barak said in 2019, no, I don't have a problem with canceling the reasonableness clause. We'll just replace it with a proportionality clause. So that, I mean, they'll just...
Right. If you have judges that are prepared to ignore the law and impose their policy preferences and impose their power, then they will ignore the law and impose their power. So it's not going to be earth-shattering. I think that what's more important is it's a way of feeling out where the public mood is and where the rebels and the Likud are, because the public mood, you can see this already, that you're not seeing the sort of hysterical mob violence in response to the talks about reasonableness that you saw in response to earlier proposals. And it's not because the proposals are fundamentally different. I think it's just because the hysteria and the anarchy and the nihilism that marked the earlier protests, let's burn down the country, has dissipated somewhat. I think some people, I don't know how many, some people have come to their senses, and others of them just got tired of going out and torching institutions every week, destroying the army one week, destroying the economy the next week. This is not easy to keep up the energy to do all these things. Right, so that's one of the things we're seeing. But the ultimate test will be when we get to the vote. We will see the handful of members of the Likud who have been leaking to the media criticism of judicial reform for political reasons. We'll see if ultimately they will support these very necessary measures, or they'd rather join
You see the watered down reform agenda that's currently on the table in the Knesset as a way to push the ball forward. Because, I mean, the fact is that they are operating in a deadline. The latest that they can do something to change the way the judges are selected, apparently, is October, because that's when the judges are supposed to be selected. So that they have, they don't have a lot of time to do this. They have to do it either in the current convention of the Knesset or at the outset of the winter one, which starts at the end of the high holidays at the end of September.
Right. So this is why I divide things. Like the substantive stuff can get done today, a year from now, 2 years from now. Right. That's the substantive stuff is not on stopwatch. And I'll add that the substantive stuff is less important unless you have the right judges in there. Judicial appointments is on a timeline, has a deadline. The reason it has a deadline is because the current president of the Supreme Court is about to retire, and somebody's going to have to be appointed as the new president of the Supreme Court. There are new judges that are going to have to be appointed for the Supreme Court, new judges in lots of lower courts as well. Now, the appointments of new judges, that you can sit back on and wait, right? I mean, the judges, the number of judges in the Supreme Court is 15. It hasn't always had 15 judges, right? It's been shorthanded, short-staffed for very long periods of time. But you do have to have a president, and so a decision has to be made in order to appoint a president. If it's someone like the current president, then that's a recipe for continued overreach by judicial aristocracy and confrontation with the democratic branches of government. And so something has to be done there before the next president is appointed.
All right. Well, and do you think that they will? Because I mean, Netanyahu has taken this off for now. Yariv Levin apparently, and David Amsalem is a judge, who's a minister inside of the Justice Ministry under Yariv Levin. They both have put out this proposal that would take the judges and the Bar Association representatives out of the Judicial Selection Committee, but it would give a 50-50 split between the opposition and the coalition in membership in the Judicial Selection Committee. Some of them would actually be members of Knesset and ministers, and some of them would be public official or public. They would be elected by the politicians, so that they would be appointees of the politicians, which is sort of why bother? But whatever. So they're bringing in non-politicians who are selected by the politicians, so that essentially you're certain of a gridlock of 50-50 between the opposition and the coalition, which is, I mean, that's pretty. That's
there have been a lot of compromises that have been suggested. I think that some of the compromises make sense. Most of them do not. And anyway, they're rather pointless because the opposition is not interested in any compromise that helps. So if you get to one that they'll accept, then that's a pretty good sign that it's not one that you should be interested in, right? At least under the current political situation.
Well, at least they're not accepting that one either. I mean, I think that, basically the idea is that everything then sort of relies on the 3 or 4 Likud members of Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, Yoav Gallant, David Biton, and maybe there's another 1 or 2 apparently who have been sitting on the fence and won't say whether they're going to vote for this stuff or not, or that they did say that they would vote for the reasonableness clause. Are they going to allow this government to do what it promised the voters or not? And
what is necessary to do. Yeah.
And what's necessary.
Right. And so, and that ultimately is, I mean, if you want to, you can think about it. What's the compromise that they'll accept? And since their position is not quite rational, it's very difficult to know where that line is. Right. The idea that there are only 2 ways to select judges. Either one has one where there's guaranteed bias both on ideology, political ideology, and on institutional power, right? That they're always at pro-aristocracy, and they're 90% of the time ideologically biased towards the far left. Or in the alternative, you have a system that can't appoint anyone, right? Or can only appoint make appointments by bargains, with the assumption that there are going to be bargains. With this opposition, there are not going to be bargains. That's an insane way to set things up. I mean, there's a balance that comes about through political appointment that you can see, for example, in the United States. No party stays in power forever. There are elections. And a run of Republican presidents gives you a run of Republican judges, and a run of Democrat presidents gives you a run of Democratic judges. And the idea that after we've had a run of 75 years of judicial appointments on the left in Israel, that we'll have a little run of judicial appointments on the right. It's just not the end of the world. And we have to recognize that, because this is
Well, it is if you have it is if you have all the power in your hands and you don't want to share any of it.
right. It's just that what you're describing is the power of people who are denying that they have any power at all. They're claiming that they're under the foot of a fascist dictatorship that wants to have, God forbid, the majority of the country carrying out its preferences in accordance with the law.
Yeah, what I love is they call it one-sided legislation. You know, the concept of a parliamentary democracy is you have two sides, and one side wins means that it gets the majority in the parliament, and then they get to pass laws, even if the opposition opposes it. And it's just this weird concept called majority rule, and that's not acceptable. And you got to light the fire to the country to oppose that. But anyway, I think that we've run out of our time for this week, Professor Avi Bell, and I appreciate you coming on today. And we'll just have to see. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's not about law; it's about politics. And then the question just is, do our politicians have the political will and the self-confidence to actually do what needs to be done, or are they going to be intimidated? And the same is true of our judges, and the same is true of really, I guess, everybody. Are you going to do the right thing? Or are you going to do the wrong thing?
That's it. So all we can do is hope for the people with courage and integrity to win out.
What a disaster. Okay. All right. Well, we will have to revisit this again probably soon, because these are the times that try our souls and force us to talk to lawyers all the time. Anyway.
All right. Just as long as we don't get to first get rid of all the lawyers, right? Okay.
I think I'll tell you the truth. At the end, when this is all behind us, that happy day when we can look back and say, I can't believe we survived that. How did that even happen? I think that a lot of people are going to want to throw all of you lawyers down.
Okay.
It's not my fault, I'm just saying it's a prediction. I could be wrong. I don't know that I ever have been, but if I am, it could be happening. Anyway, all right, guys, I'll talk to you later. I think it's getting late here. Take care. Thanks again, Avi, for coming on.